Welcome back to Getting Lost. We're on to episode 12. Sorry, it's myself, Gooder, and my good friend.
Dan, who is maybe slightly less lost about Lost, but not very sure.
Yep, so we've got whatever the case may be, which I think slows it down a little bit from the previous week, but we still got quite a lot going on here.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this one was a weaker episode than, say, last week's episode overall, and was kind of weirdly structured in a lot of ways. So, like, one thing that was telling was like the flashback sequence was probably covered the shortest period of time of any of the flashback sequences we've had so far.
Yeah,
because it only really focused on what the bank robbery, and I think it suffered a little bit from trying to be a little bit too clever, or maybe not necessarily trying to be, but sort of trying to introduce too many like little plot twists into it. In that they sort of tried to have it. So I think you had 4, maybe 5 flashback bits, chopped up elements, and it very much felt like each one of these bits is trying to do a little bit of a sort of hoodwink to the audience type thing, but in a lot of ways that didn't work. So like you get the introduction of Kate being in the bank, and sort of seemingly innocent and there to do, and then the next bit is sort of switching over to reveal, Kate was part of the robbery type thing. But you kind of already knew that because because of what you knew about Kate in the beginning.
Yeah,
you weren't buying the fact that she was there as an innocent bystander in any way, shape, or form.
You're already like, this is a bit sus.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, she's clearly involved. So that kind of little twist didn't particularly work. And then you've got the sort of reveal that Kate's the one who planned the thing, and then you've got her double crossing all of the people type thing. So it felt like it was trying to fit in an awful lot of little twists in a very short, compressed bit of time, and only some of them sort of pulled off, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because I think the main thing we get obviously is, you have the initial bit where you're like, this is a bit off because we don't believe that Kate is a photographer, taking pictures of theaters or whatever. Then you get the reveal that she's kind of involved with the robbery. So like the initial thing then is like, oh, is this why she's wanted?
Yeah.
But that still doesn't quite feel like right. You don't think, you're kind of already thinking this probably isn't why, like, well, this certainly isn't the only reason why she's wanted. So you can see what they were trying to do. I think the interesting little bits for me in these flashbacks are kind of like some of the smaller bits. You get another name for her, so this time people are calling her Maggie.
Yep. But she specifically says she's not Maggie. So
which continues, which obviously opens up that question of, is Kate her actual name? We still don't know that for sure.
Yep.
It's interesting for me in that these flashbacks put her much closer to being like Sawyer than anybody else.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing that the takeaway from it was very much, you kind of knew already that she was a little bit chameleon-like, but this sort of really does sort of hammer that home, because you've got her double cross of the team that she's robbing the bank with, but you also have a very explicit demonstration of her just doing it to trick the manager into opening the key and that sort of thing. So you actually see her putting it into practice and it going in a lot of ways. So yeah, that was the sort of main takeaway I think you get from Kate, is that she clearly is very, very good at manipulating what her people perceive her as.
Yeah,
I think it's probably the best way of describing it.
And I think, and having saying that, and the fact that this episode makes her quite close to Sawyer can tell, which I think is interesting, because there's that little bit of interaction he has with Jack, where Jack's asking him for the case, and Sawyer says, whatever she's told you to make you do this, it's a lie.
Yeah. And there's the big parallel between the way she manipulates Jack into getting her the contents of the case, and the way she manipulates the crew into getting her into the bank so she can get into the safety deposit box.
And she tries the sort of sleight of hand trick to keep the key. when they dig it out of the grave.
And that's probably the other important thing that you take away from this episode is that up to now, there's been a little bit of distance between Kate and Jack, but at the same time, they generally speaking seem to be coming together. But the element of trust that was there seems to almost completely disintegrate over the course of this episode, because he's becoming more and more aware of the lies and the bits behind it and the manipulations and that sort of thing, which I think is important because, again, it's distancing Jack from elements of the group, it's distancing Kate from elements of the group and all the other
bits. I think the last sort of scene in that story arc in the episode with Kate and Jack opening the case, I think is really good, because it kind of starts with Jack's like, anything you want to tell me before I open this? He's quite kind of like confrontational, I guess.
Yeah.
And then he starts opening the case and he's making this very kind of deliberate, like pulling out all the stuff down. And then he finds the little envelope that's in there. And I think what's interesting is he doesn't open it himself. He actually does give it to her to open. And I really liked, I think Evangeline Lilly is really good in this scene because she takes it from him, and then first of all there's this really kind of like relief look on her face, like, oh god, I've got a hold of it. And then she opens it and then she breaks down. And then I think what's interesting at the end of the scene is, she's saying like, this belonged to the man that I killed. But Jack doesn't ask like any follow-up questions. He doesn't want to know anymore, and he just kind of leaves. Whereas I think if this had happened like a couple of episodes earlier, if that trust had still been there, he would have been like, oh, tell me about it.
Yeah, I mean, there was a few bits and pieces about that, because there is the demand from Jack, which basically, because her initial answer is, it belonged to the man she loved, it belonged to the man I loved, and then it belonged to the man I killed. And it's sort of giving you that question: is that one and the same person, or is she just has she changed her story, or is it actually the same story? She killed the man she loved, and that's the sort of point where she breaks down, and Jack sort of walks away from it. But it's also interesting that she tells Jack what's in the case, and to a large extent, it's exactly as she said. Because
the only thing she hasn't mentioned is that envelope with the model plane in it.
Yeah, and you kind of there's a whole heap of questions about what on earth is this little tiny model plane so important to Kate that prompted her to shoot a bunch of people, break into a bank, get this. Well, you assume it's the same thing, and it's this tiny little model plane.
And I think that's another thing. Actually, there's another small thing you can pick out of the flashbacks is Kate is clearly very capable with firearms. We've had a little bit before, like earlier on, I think right near the start of the series, where she got hold of the gun and she's taken the clip out and she's given like the gun to Sawyer and the clip to Saeed, or vice versa. And she acted when she did that as if she didn't know what she was doing.
Yes.
She was like, how do I take the bullets out? Whereas in this flashback, we can clearly see she can handle a firearm.
Yeah, I mean, and they make a deliberate point of it, because I picked up on that you've had up to this point, you had the sequence in episode 2, it was part of the pilot, I think it was, where she has to ask, how do I, but this time around, you again, it's that sort of trying to do the little switcheroos where she picks up the gun and goes, I don't know.
Yeah, so when she's like play acting, she's like, I can't.
So, but then the guy almost laughs at the fact that, you don't know how to use a gun, which very firmly implies that she's actually very, very good with a gun, as demonstrated when she shoots the 3 members of her crew. So and it's interesting because I sort of noted down that when she does turn on her crew, it's an interesting combination of brutality but restraint.
Because she very deliberately injures them.
Yeah, she very deliberately injures them but doesn't kill them. Brutal, very definitive, taking out you 2 guys
in a very John Wick style. And I think the other probably intriguing thing there is what makes her turn on them is the fact that she thinks the sort of lead gang member is about to shoot the bank manager.
Yeah.
That's what makes her kind of turn on them.
And so all of that sequence was, that was the bit where you got some additional insight to this side of Kate, that, she was there for a specific reason. On one side, you sort of initially think, oh, it's to do with the fact that he's given away that she's involved to the bank manager. But then you kind of realize, oh no, it's because he's going to kill the bank manager. And the fact that she does this brutal but restraint sort of disabling of the three crew members really backs up that that's the thing that she's concerned about, because if it wasn't that, she'd probably have killed them. Or and this harks back to this question of, is Kate a killer? Because we keep getting this hints that, she's clearly capable of it, but at the same time always stops short and always prevents it.
Yeah.
So there's an underlying, element of goodness there.
And you still have that thing of like the marshal's reaction to her when he woke up from his coma was like so extreme.
Yeah.
So you still got that question of why was his reaction like so like
I mean, the other thing I was like, well, why does the marshal need 5 guns? Because he's got 4 guns in his case, and he had the gun that is on him. He's like, is he just?
Yeah. Another question is like, why is he carrying so many?
Does he really need 5 guns just on his lonesome? So there's some questions there. It's like, okay, what's going on with that? But
building kind of triangle between Jack, Sawyer, and Kate.
Yeah,
because the episode basically opens with Sawyer and Kate having a bit of a flirty. Swim and...
You have the whole sequence at the beginning. Like, I initially thought, oh, this is a bit weird, where they go swimming and all the other bits and pieces. But actually, you sort of come away with it, and sort of, particularly by the time the episode's ended, that you've got all of these. I think you described them as sort of similarities or parallels between Kate and Sawyer, and the fact that Sawyer's the one who picks up, he's able to identify Kate's manipulations and chameleon-like nature. That actually they're probably a lot more similar than your initial view of the characters is. And that's why it's a case of, Sawyer correctly surmises that, I want to go and have a swim and mess around and have a nice time for a period of time. And I know Kate does as well, even though she's trying not to show it. And of course, they both sort of kind of embrace that moment together, which again is just sort of, they're 2 people who, on the face of it, seem completely polar opposites, actually probably aren't, again. So,
and it's the episode, the way the episode sort of runs, it almost like that plot line almost starts off as a bit of a comedy plot line, almost, because it kind of opens up with Sarah and Kate like having a bit of banter after, like, he's been following her around because he's like, I'm protecting you, and she's like, I don't need it, and they have a bit of kind of
and she throws a rock at him.
She throws a rock at him, and he's like, "Oh, it's my knee." She's like, "It's not that bad." It's like, and he's my knee. Then obviously they have the kind of the swimming, and we see them being quite flirty when they're swimming, and then they find the case.
Yeah.
And Kate's like,
well, the dead bodies, and then the case. The dead bodies is a sort of quite a nice little wake up to the fact that you've got this sort of little idyllic moment, and then suddenly it's, oh yeah, there's 2 dead bodies under this in this lake.
And then we have that little bit of like, help me get that case, she says. And he's like, you've just called me like disgusting for taking this wallet, and now you want this case. And she's like, it's mine. And then she's like, it's not mine. So there's like this little bit of kind of like, and then we have the sequence of Sawyer trying to open the case. He's like, he's hitting it like on the tree stump, and he's trying to drop it. And we have like almost cartoonish bit where he drops it, and then Kate comes like out of a bush and is like,
yeah. I mean, that whole thing was quite like, there was in some ways it was a little bit of bad writing, because they basically set up this sort of MacGuffin case that it's not possible to open without the key, type thing. And there's a whole presumably they got sponsored by Halliburton to advertise their cases.
Halliburton cases.
Yeah. You'll be able to pick the lock of a Halliburton case. And
because the thing I get with that is like, oh, Michael knows. Why does Michael know about cases and locks? That's quite interesting. And then Hurley does it too. And I'm like, this is weird.
I think it is that the Halliburton brand of cases are quite big in America. So it's probably one of these things where us Europeans don't necessarily...
I think getting the cultural.
I think there's possibly a big sort of advertising thing about how they're sort of indestructible cases type thing, because it did really feel like they're sort of having to hammer this home that you can't possibly get into this case. Fun fact: I believe that it's a Halliburton case that is used to hold the nuclear football, which follows the president around.
Yeah, I just thought it was quite interesting because that, like, the way that storyline kind of starts quite humorously, and by the end it's quite dark, because by the end we've got to the point where basically Kate's having a breakdown and has revealed that she killed.
Well, we believe so, unless this is yet another.
As far as we know, what she's saying is.
Yeah, I mean, there's interesting bits and pieces. I mean, I think, as I said, it seemed like a weaker episode just because, like, the quality of the writing in some bits seemed not as good. And I think, like, the A plot didn't do that much to it. But there's a few interesting, like, side bits that are going on. So, like, the main other plot was sort of Shannon trying to decipher the French sort of thing on the maps type thing. And we ultimately sort of, doesn't go particularly far, but we learn, it's lyrics to some French song, which was in Finding Nemo, which...
It's Bobby Darin, it's Beyond the Sea.
Okay.
Beyond the Sea in French.
Right, okay, there we go. Which was, I guess, kind of interesting, but didn't really seem to do a huge amount in terms of pushing the things along.
Yeah, so I think from that, a couple of things in that. So it adds a little bit into the mystery of, like, what are these equations that are on this paper? And then it's like, well, why is Danielle apparently written song lyrics alongside them? Is the song lyrics mean something that's connected to the equations and the maths, or is Danielle just a crazy person
who's just writing down song lyrics type thing? Yeah,
they have that side of it. And I think on the character side, you learn kind of a bit more about Shannon, where she hasn't really been helping out with things, but she clearly has this kind of low self-esteem, where she doesn't
very, very inferiority complex type.
She doesn't believe she's capable of translating the French. She doesn't believe she can, like, help really. And it's quite, you get, like, some nice moments where, like, sort of Saeed is kind of encouraging her to help out. And then I think they start to develop quite a nice little kind of dynamic, because obviously you have that bit where Saeed's getting frustrated and he kind of shouts at her a little bit and she gives up and goes away. But then she comes back, like, at the end of the episode. She's like, I remember. Yeah,
because she's sort of working her way through trying to figure out what the I know this, but I don't know quite where it's. I guess it's one of those where it's sort of it's changed the mystery a little bit, but not. You haven't gotten any further in terms of figuring out what that means type stuff. But
I think it's kind of a bit of a lost pattern where they've given you a big, what is this element, like the week before with the thing that Boone and Locke find, and then they kind of slow it down a little bit again, where they're kind of still giving you stuff, but smaller.
So you've got because the two things that they sort of remind you about but don't progress are the maps and things that Saeed's got from Danielle, and then Boone and Locke with their secret chunk of metal somewhere type thing.
Yeah, and it's like, why are they being? I think the question for me there is like, why is Locke so secretive about that?
Yeah, I mean that was the thing I immediately note down. It's like, oh god, yet another piece of information they're not sharing with the group. It's like
you kind of get the sense that Boone would happily, like, tell everybody, but for some reason Locke is like, no, we must, take a long round. And
and Boone kind of tries to explain it away as that, like, he's found something productive for him to be doing, and, like, the others don't believe he's in any way useful, and this is his way of. So that was kind of interesting in terms of how that panned out. You also get sort of, there's a few other random little bits that I remember sort of noting down. Like, so you've got this big thing about the fact that the tides are doing something weird.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a big thing in terms of, like, the supernatural element to it. But at the same time, isn't really focused on in the episode, which is kind of interesting, because all it really does is it provides a reason for why they're having to move their camp.
Yeah.
But there's, like, the sequence where it's like, tide shouldn't do this. This is weird. The tide should be fairly consistent. They shouldn't be coming up like 20 meters in, like, a week or something like that.
There's that throwaway. Quite funny, isn't it? It's like a throwaway scene, and it's Jack and Saeed talking about tides and the beach erosion.
Yeah.
And both of them acknowledge that. Both of them say, "Oh, things aren't normal here."
Yeah.
So it's like, when you think about it, that should be like a huge moment where, like, these two characters are both like, this island's got some freaky shit going on. But it's like this little throwaway scene.
Yeah, that was the thing that was like that seems like it should be a bigger deal than they've made out of it, because they even acknowledge that this is a big deal, that but isn't sort of pursued or investigated, and everyone's just sort of, yeah, okay, so it just means we have to move down to a different bit of the beach type thing. But you kind of think that's got all the elements of something important, because you've got these two groups, one in the cave, one in the beach, and the beach group's been impacted by this weird thing going on, and they're forced to move. And they're talking about, people are reluctant to go into the woods because of all the stuff that's going on. So, it's setting a scene of what appears like it's going to be an important thread, but was very much a kind of throwaway. The sea's just completely changed. It's
and the other kind of thing that comes again a little bit comes off the back of that, you get the scenes with Rose and Charlie.
Yeah.
Where Rose is kind of encouraging Charlie to kind of come out or get over what he's been through a little bit.
And the sort of thing that's going on with Charlie, you kind of accept, because he's been through the almost dying thing, but you also fundamentally have Charlie as a character has kind of transitioned, and he kind of found his he was searching for how not to be useless in a sort of similar way to Boone is doing. And his way of doing it was kind of the sort of interactions with Claire and helping Claire out. And to have that brutally ripped away and make him, your failure in the one thing that you were doing type thing, you can kind of completely understand how he's kind of reverted back to what he was a few episodes ago before he'd sort of navigated through it.
And I think it's that episode, isn't it, with the Claire focused episode where we have Charlie saying I'm not going to let anything happen to you there. And obviously now something has happened to Claire. So he's but I think, and it takes us back and it reminds us that Charlie at least has a faith, if not being particularly strongly religious. Through some of his dialogue with Rose, particularly right at the end where she starts praying. That's that kind of reminder. If you remember, we saw Charlie going to confession.
He's the one where he certainly has an organized religion that he, at least in the past, cared about type thing. And Rose kind of steers him back towards that way, because they end up praying sort of together at the end of the episode, or maybe not quite the end of the episode, but towards the end of the episode. And she sort of is talking a lot about the difference between denial and faith.
I think she says it's a thin line, and because she keeps saying that her husband's alive, and everybody's like, really? And you obviously and you have that nice little, slightly cliched, but I think it's still a nice little moment where she's like, "It's not your fault, Charlie. It's not on you." Yeah.
I noticed that Sun is still refusing to speak English. That was
I think the interesting bit in that scene is she overhears so far, because Kate says, you're the only person who knows about me.
Right. Yeah.
As that dialogue begins, and Sun's in the background, and you get a couple of shots of Sun kind of going, pulling faces a little bit, because the two of them don't know that she speaks English.
Yeah. And so that's sort of an ongoing thing that is so she's still maintaining that piece of facade, because it's only Michael.
Yeah, so it's only Michael that knows she speaks English. Yeah.
Continuing yet again we're not going to tell each other any information that could possibly be useful to us.
Yeah, Michael's not mentioned to anybody else. By the way,
I feel that there's got to be an episode coming up where someone goes, wait a minute, guys, let's get together. If you've got any information, let's share it with the group.
That's too easy.
Point. I did clock that the deposit box was number 815, which is the same as the flight number.
Yep.
So there's clearly something, and it's interestingly contained a little model plane. It wasn't the same plane as the flight, so it wasn't that, because we had previously seen a different model plane in Claire's nightmare dream.
Yeah.
And so I immediately thought of that. I was like, oh no, it's not the same plane. It's clearly a different plane, because the one in Claire's dream was actually specifically had the 815 oceanic something on from memory. It was very specifically the plane that they crashed on was the one in her dream, while this one looked like a DC-10 or something like that.
I guess, we spoke a little bit before about how we're kind of slowly seeing the different reasons why people are ending up on that flight.
Yeah.
I guess maybe if leading into the kind of there's something supernatural going on outside of it, if you wanted to, you can kind of think, well, maybe this is how, to some extent, this is how Kate has ended up on that flight, because she's mentally, she will connect 8:15 with planes in a way that's important to her.
Yeah, could be.
In some way, maybe that's why when she's,
Yeah, there could well be. I mean, it's an interesting, that particular train of thought that we talked about 2 episodes ago, I think it was, where we talked about, there's an awful lot of things about how people end up on the plane, and the idea of choices. The idea of, in some cases, it's a deliberate choice that gets them on the plane. In other cases, it's a choice that's taken away from them, that's made by someone else, that gets them on the plane. But the other thought I had since the last time we spoke about is I sense there's some kind of, again, thread about like responsibilities. So like you've got Jack, who is basically on the plane kind of in order to address his responsibilities, but also to kind of run away from them, because he's basically trying to get rid of his father as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that when he gets on the island, he basically has to confront all of his daddy issues, is like the big thing. And with Claire, it's like she's getting on the plane ostensibly to avoid the responsibility of being the parent to the child. And effectively what it's doing is making her bear the responsibility of that. And likewise with Sun and Jin, Sun is basically looking to get away from like this abusive relationship that she has, but then chooses to get on the plane to effectively go back to that relationship with Jin. But interestingly, what's happening on the island is she's actually becoming stronger and is learning to effectively almost fix that particular relationship. So there's a bit of me that thinks there is some other, as well as the choices aspect, there's something to do with facing up to responsibilities or so on and so forth time theme that's permeating through there. But we've yet to sort of figure out how that necessarily applies to everyone, if that ends up being the case. But that was definitely a thought I had since the last time we talked about it. It was like, oh yeah, there is something else going on about, facing responsibilities. Oh, and Charlie getting clean, because, he boards the plane, basically avoiding going to rehab like his brother wanted him to do.
Yeah.
And then he's forced on the island to get clean because of so on. And so, yeah, there's a few different strands of that one. I mean, it doesn't apply to all of the characters so far, but then we don't know enough about why all the characters are necessarily on the flight so far. But that was just an extra thought I had.
Yeah, there are some like weird things to think about that are in the French, because it's not just the song lyrics. Like a couple of the other things that Shannon reads out are kind of extra things.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't gone into any great lengths to try and find out what the French meant or what the song lyrics really equated to. I mean, it seemed to sort of kind of fit the theme to do with the ocean and stuff, which they're on an island. So I'm kind of hoping that I'm not going to have to go and find out what the French means in order to understand what's going on. They'll probably become clear, because I feel this is a thread that I'm quite prepared to let the episodes explain this thread to me rather than me go and try and hunt.
And I think what happened, like as Lost went on, I think they picked up, like the people making the show picked up that people were obviously like really going through it with a comb, like the audience were really like analyzing everything. So I don't think they've started doing it yet, but definitely I would say like in later seasons they start throwing in like things similar to that just go nowhere, like almost deliberately. It's kind of like red herrings to be like, we made you research this and it doesn't really apply to anything. But I think at the moment we're still at the stage where this will get explained.
I certainly didn't have any great desire to sort of go off and Google all the lyrics and try and I was like, okay, because effectively the episode of that arc and that episode ends with them figuring out what it is. And so you therefore assume that the next episode, or maybe an episode or two's time, they'll then figure out what does that actually mean in the context of things. So
that was episode 12. whatever the case may be.
Yeah.